The morning Michelle Adeyemi turned 27. Her mother sat across from her at the breakfast table with the particular expression she reserved for serious negotiations. Lips pressed thin, wrapper tied tight across her chest. Eyes carrying the weight of a woman who had seen too much of life to be romantic about it. Dr. Femi Koka is coming this Saturday, her mother, Mrs. Ngozi Adeyemi, said, setting down her tea with a finality that suggested the matter was already settled somewhere in the universe, and Michelle simply had not received the memo. Michelle kept her eyes on her own cup. Mama. Don't mama me. The man has a house in Lekki, 2 cars. He did his residency in London, Michelle. London. She said the word the way Nigerians see it. Stretched, reverent, like a prayer answered. He asked about you specifically. His aunt and I spoke for 1 hour on the phone. I'm sure his aunt is a lovely woman. She is. And she will be a lovely mother-in-law if you have any sense. Mrs. Ngozi reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with hers, and her voice softened in the way that was somehow harder to resist than her sternness. My daughter, love is a beautiful thing. But love does not pay DSTV subscription. Love does not send children to good schools. I loved your father completely, totally. And when he died, love did not feed you. I fed you. With my hands, with my sweat. I do not want that life for you. Michelle looked at her mother then. Really looked at her. And saw every early morning and late night, every skipped meal and borrowed money written into the lines of her face. She understood. She genuinely did. Because there was Dare Olawole, with his long legs and his loud laughter and the way he quoted Wole Soyinka when he was nervous, as if literature could steady a man. She had met him at a friend's birthday gathering in Surulere, and he had spent the first 20 minutes debating the meaning of a poem with her. And by the end of the night, she had known, in that reckless cellular way you cannot argue yourself out of, that she was in trouble. He had graduated 3 years ago with a second-class upper in economics from Unilag. Since then, the Nigerian economy had swallowed his ambitions whole and spat out nothing but rejection letters and dead-end prospects. He lived in a small, honest flat in Mushi. 1 bedroom, a sitting room that doubled as a study, a kitchen where the tap had moods. He was not lazy. She knew this. She had watched him dress carefully for interviews, iron his 1 good shirt, pray quietly before he left. He came back each time a little quieter than before. But he called her every evening. He remembered the name of her late father. He made her laugh until her stomach hurt. And when he told her he loved her, she believed him with her whole chest. When Dr. Femi Koka came that Saturday, polished, pleasant, and carrying an expensive bottle of wine, Michelle sat through the visit with respectful smiles and hollow eyes. He was handsome enough, accomplished, certainly. He spoke well and laughed at the right moments. But he was not Dari. 2 months later, Michelle told her mother she was marrying Dari Olawole. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. You are choosing a man with nothing, her mother said quietly. Not with anger, which would have been easier, but with a grief so calm it filled the whole room. I am choosing a man I love, Mama. He will find work. Things will turn around. Mrs. Ngozi looked at her daughter for a long time. Then she stood, picked up her wrapper, and walked to her room, pausing only at the doorway. "I pray to God," she said, without turning around, "that love keeps you warm when everything else goes cold." The wedding was small, but genuine. A court ceremony and a modest backyard celebration. Jollof rice and pepper soup and dancing that went on longer than the budget had planned for. Michelle wore her aunt's altered lace and thought she had never been more beautiful. Dari cried when he saw her, which made her cry, which made her makeup run, which made everyone laugh. She moved into his flat in Moshi. The bed was small, a 3/4 that they navigated each night like a negotiation. The ceiling fan wobbled. The neighbors were noisy and frequently dramatic. Michelle painted the walls a warm yellow to make it feel like a home. Hung curtains she sewed herself, planted a small pot of basil on the kitchen windowsill. It was not much, but in those first weeks it felt like everything. She would wake before him, make akara or ogi or whatever the budget allowed, and they would eat together in the mornings before he left for another interview in another part of the city. She had her small job at a printing company in Ikeja. Not glamorous, not well-paying, but honest. She believed in him. She told him so regularly, with her words and her cooking and her presence. She did not yet know what her mother had known all along. That a man who cannot find his footing in the world will sometimes, if he's not careful, if he's not strong enough, start looking for something to blame. And that the nearest, softest thing is almost always the woman who loves him.
Well, as always, do tell us where you are watching from. I love to see how far these stories go. Enjoy. The rejection letters stopped coming by the 6th month. Not because Dari had found work, but because he had stopped applying. Michelle did not notice immediately. He still left the house some mornings, dressed in his good shirt, returning in the afternoon smelling of suya and other men's conversations. It was only when she found the stack of unopened emails on his phone, interview invitations, follow-ups, a recruiter who had written 3 times, that she understood the living had become performance. He was going nowhere and returning from there daily. And somewhere in the space between, his grief had cuddled into something uglier. "You should call this recruiter back," she said one evening, setting his plate before him gently. "The way you approach something that might startle. She's written again. It sounds serious." "Did I ask you?" His voice was flat, not loud. Flatness, she was learning, was worse than loudness. "I'm just saying." "You're always just saying, Michelle." He looked up then, and his eyes held something she didn't recognize. "Since I married you, everything has scattered. Before you, I was getting interviews. Before you, I had prospects. You came into my life and brought your bad luck with you." She stood very still. "That's not true, Dari. You don't know what's true. You sit in your small job feeling like a big woman because you bring small money home. You think that makes you superior to me? I never said, get out of my front." She took her plate to the kitchen and ate standing up, alone, listening to the television he had turned on in the sitting room. The basil on the windowsill had begun to wilt. She watered it carefully and told herself it would recover. The first time he hit her, She convinced herself it was an accident. They had argued about money. There was never enough. And the landlord had sent a boy to knock on the door twice that week. She had suggested, carefully, that perhaps he could take a temporary job, anything, while he searched for something in his field. She knew a woman whose husband drove for a logistics company on weekends. The slap came before she finished the sentence. It was not hard, not by the measure of what would come later. But the sound of it, that sharp, domestic crack, split something open in the room that never fully closed again. Dare stared at his own hand, as if it belonged to someone else. He apologized. He wept, actually wept, and held her face in his palms and told her she was his heart, his life, his reason. He bought her chin-chin from the woman down the road and robbed her back that night and swore on his mother's grave that it would never happen again. She believed him. Women who have loved deeply are very good at believing things. The weeks that followed arranged themselves into a brutal routine. Michelle woke at 5 each morning to wash, cook, and prepare for her own workday. After work, she stopped at the market, calculated every naira with the precision of someone who understood that miscalculation had consequences. She came home, cooked again, cleaned, sometimes took in small tailoring work from the neighbor, Mrs. Balogun, sewing into the night by the weak light of a bedside lamp, while Dare slept or watched football or sat on the veranda talking to friends whose names she had never learned. When she raised any concern, money, his search for work, the landlord, anything, the atmosphere shifted immediately. His jaw would set. His eyes would go to that flat, dangerous place. Sometimes it remained at words, cutting, precise words designed to find the softest part of her and press. Other times, it did not remain at words. She learnt the architecture of his anger. She learnt which evenings were safe and which were not. She learned to read the sound of his footsteps at the door like a weather forecast. She did not call her mother. The thought of her mother's face, not triumphant, she knew it wouldn't be triumphant, which was somehow worse, kept the phone in her bag. Instead, she smiled at work and told Mrs. Balogun she was fine and watered the basil even after it died, out of habit, out of the need to tend to something. She lost weight. Her colleague Temi asked twice if she was eating. She said she was fine. She was not fine. She was disappearing one morning at a time into the life her mother had begged her not to choose. It was a Tuesday when she met him. She had been sent on an errand to pick up paper stock from a supplier on the island, a trip that required a bus and a long walk and the particular exhaustion of Lagos traffic in the afternoon heat. She was standing outside the supplier's shop, her bag on her shoulder and sweat at her temples, trying to calculate if she had enough left on her transport card, when a dark Mercedes slowed beside her. The window came down. Dr. Femi Koka looked exactly as she remembered, pressed, composed, unhurried, as though the chaos of Lagos existed in a separate dimension from him. He blinked once in recognition, and then he smiled. Michelle Adeyemi. He said her name like it was something he had kept somewhere and was now returning. How long has it been? Almost 2 years. She hated that her voice came out steady. She hated more that she was aware of her freeing sleeve, the tiredness around her eyes, the way she must look to him. A woman being slowly subtracted from herself. He insisted on giving her a ride back to the mainland. She should have declined. She knew she should have declined. But her feet hurt and the sun was merciless, and she sat in the cool leather interior and stared out the window and felt for 20 minutes what it was like to not be exhausted. They exchanged numbers before he dropped her off. Politely, she told herself. Just politely. He called the next evening, and the evening after that. She told herself it was only conversation. He was easy to talk to. He did not make her calculate her words before she spoke them. He laughed genuinely and asked questions and listened to her answers. He told her about his work at the hospital, about a medical conference he had attended in Abuja, about his mother who kept a garden in Ibadan. He did not ask about Dari directly, but he asked how she was, with the particular emphasis of a man who suspected the answer was more than fine. And she answered each time that she was managing. "You deserve better than managing, Michelle," he said one night, and something in her chest contracted painfully. "Femi, I'm not saying anything inappropriate. I'm just saying." A pause. "I think about what could have been. I don't think you're happy." She was quiet for a long time. "I made my choice," she said finally. "Choices can be survived," he said. "Come and see me. Just dinner. I'll send a car." She said no that night, and the night he asked again. But the third time he called, Dari had broken one of her good plates against the kitchen wall because the stew had too much pepper, and she had swept the pieces in silence with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And when Femi's name lit up her phone screen, she had walked to the bathroom, turned on the tap to cover her voice, and said yes. The restaurant was in Victoria Island, the kind of place where the lighting is soft on purpose and the menu has no prices because the clientele do not need them. Michelle wore the nicest dress she owned, the one she had not worn since the wedding, and sat across from Femi and ate the best meal she had tasted in 2 years. He was charming, attentive. He refilled her glass and complimented her genuinely and did not once make her feel small. After dinner, in the car, he told her he had missed her. He told her she was still the most interesting woman he had ever met. He asked, carefully, tenderly, if she would come upstairs. Just to talk, he said, to not have the evening end. Michelle sat with the question. She thought of Dari asleep in their small bed, one arm thrown over her side as if claiming territory he no longer bothered to tend. She thought of the broken plate. She thought of her swollen savings, tiny, stubborn, gathered naira by naira from her tailoring work and hidden in the lining of a bag Dari didn't know about, because she had learnt, in the quiet way women in her situation learn things, that security must be secret. She thought of Femi's easy life and his cool apartment and how simple everything might have been. She was so tired. Okay, she heard herself say. Okay. She knew before it was over that she had made a mistake. Not because of what happened, though she would need time to carry that, but because of how he changed the moment it was done. The warmth left his face like a light switching off. He sat up, reached for his phone, and laughed. A short, careless sound that hit her like cold water. "You know," he said, not quite looking at her, "I actually thought you'd say no. I respect women who say no." He shook his head slowly. A married woman. Kai, what would your mother say? Michelle went very still. I'm a serious man, Michelle. I can't be with a woman who would cheat on her husband. He said it with the moral authority of someone who had not 20 minutes ago been the other party. You should go. She dressed in silence. Her hands were steady now. Steadier than they'd been in months, actually. But the steadiness was made of something cold and hard. The kind that comes not from peace, but from a woman who has finally, fully hit the floor and found it solid beneath her. He called a driver for her. She sat in the back of the car all the way back to Mushin and looked out at the Lagos night. The generators humming, the roadside fires, the city that never fully slept, and did not cry. She was done crying. She was done with many things. She did not sleep that night. She lay beside Dari in their small bed, listening to him breathe, and made a list in her head. Not of grievances. She had enough of those to fill a book. But of facts. Cold, organizing facts. The kind you need when emotion has been burned down to its last ember, and what remains is simply clarity. Fact. She had 3,850 naira in the hidden lining of her bag. Fact. She had a job. Small, yes. Underpaying, yes. But hers. Fact. Mrs. Balogun had mentioned twice, in the offhand way of a woman leaving a door open, that her sister in Yaba had a spare room she rented cheaply to working women. Fact. She was 28 years old and still alive and still whole in the ways that mattered. Fact. She had survived 2 years of this man. She could survive leaving him. She turned her head and looked at Dari's profile in the dark. The face she had once found so dear. The face she had chosen over sense and safety and her mother's quiet pleading. She looked at it for a long time without flinching. Without hatred even. Hatred was too energetic, and she was conserving everything now. Then, she turned back to the ceiling and began to plan. She gave herself 2 weeks. Not out of hesitation. The decision had been made on the floor of Femi Koka's apartment and was not reversible, but out of strategy. She had watched enough women leave badly, in panic, with nothing but the clothes they ran in, returning later for the rest only to find it destroyed or withheld. Michelle was not going to leave badly. She moved carefully. She rerouted a small portion of her salary each week through Temi at work, who asked no questions and kept a straight face, and squeezed her hand once in the break room with the quiet solidarity of a woman who understood. She confirmed the room in Yaba through Mrs. Balogun, paid a deposit from her hidden savings, and was shown a small, clean space with a window that faced east and got the morning light. It was not much. It was absolutely everything. She continued to cook, continued to clean, continued to absorb Dari's moods with the practiced stillness of a woman playing a role for the last time. Twice he raised his hand, and she did not flinch. Not because it didn't frighten her, but because she had discovered that a woman with a plan is harder to frighten than a woman who is trapped. He sensed something had shifted, and it confused him, which made him angrier, which told her she was right to hurry. On the last night, she did something she had not done in over a year. She called her mother.
The phone rang 4 times. Then her mother's voice, rough with sleep, suspicious with concern. Michelle? It's past 11. What's wrong? She had rehearsed something calm and composed. Instead, what came out was, Mama, you are right. The silence on the other end lasted only a moment. Then her mother said, very quietly, Where are you? I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm leaving him. Her voice held. She was proud of it for holding. I have a place to go. I have a small plan. I needed to tell you. She heard her mother exhale, a long, shaking breath that carried 2 years of worry releasing at once. Come home, Mrs. Ngozi said. Michelle, forget the plan. Just come. Not yet, Mama. I need to do this myself first. She paused, finding the words. I need to be the one who walks out, not the one who ran away. Another silence. Then her mother said, with a softness she reserved for very few moments, You are your father's daughter. Stubborn and brave and completely impossible. A breath. Call me the minute you're out. I will. And Michelle. Her mother's voice caught slightly, just slightly. I am not happy I was right. I want you to know that. I never wanted to be right about this. Michelle closed her eyes. I know, Mama. I know. She left on a Friday morning. Dari was asleep. He had come home late the night before in a foul mood and eating and falling into bed without a word to her, which had made the whole thing cleaner somehow. She rose at 5 as always, washed, dressed, made herself a quiet breakfast she actually tasted for once. Her bag was already packed. It had been packed for 4 days, tucked behind the cleaning supplies in a corner he never approached. 1 bag. She had arrived with more, but she was leaving with 1. Because some things you don't carry forward. She looked around the flat one last time. The yellow walls she had painted, the curtains she had sewn, the windowsill where the basil had died and she had never stopped watering it. She realized now because giving up on the plant felt too much like giving up on herself. She picked up the small clay pot, dry and empty as it was, and set it by the door. Then she shouldered her bag, picked up her pot, and walked out. She did not slam the door. She closed it gently, with a quiet, final click, because she was not angry at the door. She was not angry at the flat. She was not even, she realized as she stepped into the cool morning air of Mushin, particularly angry anymore. She was just done. The street was already alive. The bread seller, the generator sounds, a man hosing down a car. Lagos in the morning. Indifferent and bright and relentlessly continuing. She walked to the bus stop with her bag on her shoulder and her clay pot under her arm and her chin at an angle her mother would have recognized. The room in Yaba was small and clean and faced east. She set the clay pot on the windowsill the first morning and went and bought a new basil seedling from the woman at the market on the corner. A fat, vigorous one, dark green and determined, and planted it in fresh soil and placed it in the light. Then she sat on the edge of her narrow bed and breathed. Just breathed. No footsteps to monitor. No atmosphere to read.
no dinner to calculate. Just the sounds of the street below and the morning coming through the window, and her own heartbeat, steady and entirely her own. She cried then, finally, fully, not from sadness exactly, but from the particular release of a woman who has been holding herself together by sheer force for so long that the act of being safe feels at first indistinguishable from falling apart. She cried for about 20 minutes. Then she washed her face, made a cup of tea, and began to think about what came next.
What came next was this. Temi, who had a cousin at a mid-sized publishing firm in Lagos Island, passed along Michelle's name after she mentioned carefully that her friend was talented and available and looking for something better. The interview was 3 weeks after she moved to Yaba. She wore her good dress, the one she had worn to Femi's restaurant, which she had decided to reclaim from that memory and make into something else. She was sharp and prepared and honest about her experience, and she was offered the position. The salary was not extravagant, but it was nearly double what she had been earning, and it was hers. And when the offer letter came through to her email, she sat in the Yaba room and read it 4 times. Her mother came the following Saturday with a pot of egusi, a bag of provisions, and the most restrained expression of vindication Michelle had ever witnessed on a human face, which is to say, Mrs. Ngozi Adeyemi said absolutely nothing pointed and simply held her daughter for a long time in the doorway. "You're thinner," her mother said finally, pulling back to look at her. "I'll gain it back." "You will." Her mother cupped her face. "You look like yourself. You haven't looked like yourself in a long time."
She did not think much about Dari. Occasionally, she heard things through the extended network of mutual acquaintances that Lagos maintained like a vast, gossipy nervous system, that he had moved back to his family in Abeokuta, that there had been some trouble, that he was not doing well. She received this information with the neutrality of someone reading news about a country she had once visited and did not plan to return to. She thought less about Fimi Koka. Or rather, she thought about him differently than she might have expected. Not with the shame he had intended to leave her with. That had lasted about as long as the car ride home. But with a clear-eyed understanding of what that night had been. A woman at the very bottom of herself, reaching for the wrong handhold. It had not been her finest hour. She owned that, fully, without flinching. But she had also learned in the months since that a single bad night did not define a woman, any more than a single rejection defined a man. Though the world was considerably more generous with that mercy toward men than women, which was a conversation she filed away for another time. What she knew was this. She had not broken. She had bent, badly, in ways she was not proud of, but she had not broken. And she had walked out on her own feet on a Friday morning in Mushin with a dead basil plant under her arm. And that, in the accounting of her life, meant something. 8 months after she left, on a warm Thursday evening, she was sitting on the small balcony of a new flat, slightly larger, still modest, hers, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Michelle?" A woman's voice, warm and slightly formal. "This is Dr. Amaka Ose. I got your number from Temi Adebayo. I run a women's advocacy organization here in Lagos. We do legal support, relocation assistance, economic empowerment for women living abusive situations." A brief pause. "Temi told me a little about your story. She thought you might be willing to speak at one of our community sessions. Share your experience. You don't have to, of course. Michelle leaned back in her chair. Through the balcony railing, she could see the street below. The evening traffic, a woman selling groundnuts with a baby tied to her back, the whole enormous, ordinary machinery of Lagos life continuing as it always did, indifferent to private griefs and private recoveries alike. "When is the session?" she asked.
She spoke for 40 minutes. She did not perform strength she didn't have. She did not skip the parts that were ugly, the breaking of herself to fit into a shrinking life, the way she had mistaken endurance for love. The night on Victoria Island she had spent a long time deciding whether to include, and then included, because she had decided that the only stories worth telling were the true ones. The women in the room, 12 of them, ranging from a girl who looked barely 20 to a woman with grey at her temples, were very quiet while she spoke. Afterward, the young one came up to her. She had a small bruise at her jaw, faded to yellow-green, the color of a lie someone was maintaining. "How did you know when to leave?" the girl asked. Michelle looked at her for a moment. "When I finally understood," she said slowly, "that I was working harder to save the marriage than he ever had. That all the love was coming from one direction." She paused. "Love is not supposed to be something only you are doing." The girl nodded. Her eyes were wet. "Is there somewhere safe you can go?" Michelle asked. The girl hesitated, then nodded again. "Then go," Michelle said simply. "Go while you still know the way." That night, she came home to her flat and watered the basil on the windowsill. Lush now, full and dark green, spilling over the sides of the clay pot, fragrant in the evening air. She made herself a cup of tea and sat with it in the quiet. She was not where she had imagined herself at 28. She had no grand house, no European-trained doctor, no easy life arranged in advance. She had a modest flat and a job she was good at, and a mother who came on Saturdays, and a friend named Temi, who had, in the small and faithful ways that matter most, helped save her life. She had a story she was no longer ashamed of. She had herself back. Outside, Lagos did what Lagos always does, roared and hummed and refused to sleep, vast and chaotic and stubbornly, magnificently alive. Michelle sipped her tea, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid of what tomorrow would bring.